Well, whatever we don't want in here, I'll just trim it out. So you're rolling right now, so.
Okay. Well, we will open with word of prayer then. Okay, Father, we appreciate this opportunity to gather together and look into your word. And Lord, we don't depend on our own understanding. We look to you to enlighten us. The Holy Spirit, you come alongside us, you guide us into all truth. You take those things of our Lord Jesus and make them known to us. And we just ask you to minister now in this time. Help us to be open in our understanding to what you show us, to receive what you have for us to see. We give you the praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, Book of Esther, and we're starting. We're going to have a little bit of an introduction here. Kind of back and forth about how to do the pictures, but we'll play with this. The first part, right here, if you've read Esther at all, you know King Ahasuerus is one of the main characters there. And starting out, this is an actual relief from some. I think this is actually from Persepolis, which is a city that he built. But as it says at the bottom, this is historical evidence for King Ahasuerus. The reason I'm putting this in, it's kind of a starting point because several people, or some scholars, we put it that way, question whether or not the event in the book of Esther is true or not. So, as far as the king, this tablet on the right of the tablet stating Ahasuerus as king, that actually is what that says in there. Part of it is that Ahasuerus is now installed as king of the Persian Empire, etc. So he's a given. It's just the part about Esther in this whole story that gets some people upset. Okay, for an introduction, is the book of Esther true or fiction? A myth? And as I've said, there's been some controversy. Actually, I've even got a, not in our stuff here, but there was a Jewish rabbi who was complaining, and this is back probably before the time of Christ, that the book of Esther should not be in the Jewish Bible because it didn't say anything about God. God's not mentioned in it, so it shouldn't be in there. There's a lot of things like that going on. And there's, it's written, it seems a little bit odd to us maybe at times, but it'd probably be more odd in the original Hebrew because it's in the Hebrew poetic form, so the duplicates. They say, well, it's just a poem, and it's just an allegory or something to illustrate a point. So, you know, that's something for you to be aware of. There's a field out there of scholars and so forth that think this is just a parable, something to illustrate a point, not necessarily true. For many folks, including myself, so you know what my bias is, it's in the Old Testament, and I've always considered the Old Testament to be God's Word. The whole thing as it is. And the other thing that, the other thing that makes me more interested, or excuse me, that it's a true event is the fact that the Jews celebrate the Feast of Purim even today. I mean, historically, they've never, ever questioned. They might question if Esther's supposed to be in the Bible or not, but they've never questioned the events actually happened. So the book there in the middle part is written to the book of Esther, and I'm doing some prep work here, and I think maybe you'll pick up, if you don't pick up on it, say something, but pick up on why we've got so much background here a little bit. Book of Esther records a 10-year event that happened in the Persian capital of Susa. It was written to and translated for the Jews throughout the Persian Empire. It was written in Hebrew, the original from Mordecai, but then it was translated. Because the diaspora, and that's the people, when the Jews went into exile, when Jerusalem, Judea was overthrown, went into exile, Daniel, the 3 Hebrew children, all of that. When that all happened, not all of the Jews stayed in the Babylonian Empire. They moved around. And they called those that didn't go back to diaspora. And not all of them were literate Hebrews. We're talking generations later. They were literate in the language of the province they were in. And we'll get that up here in a couple of minutes. And this is where this is what God started showing me. But they were familiar with the big picture. What we're looking at here, the book of Esther, is kind of like a chapter out of a larger book. And one of the things, reason I'm doing some of the background and stuff here, is so we can appreciate what the book is. Mm-hmm. Okay? They were familiar with the big picture, like none of us here have any question when somebody says 9/11 or ISIS or some of those things. You take 100 years from now, or you take some of our grandkids, and you say, yeah, I remember 9/11, what was that? They don't have the big picture, they don't understand. And thing is, 9/11 was really just an event and a whole larger happening, really, because of retaliation and invasion and, there's a bigger picture to this. Okay. So, as we move through this book, we will pause occasionally to consider this larger picture and how its end, or the end, affected even the coming of the Messiah. It's all tied into this. Okay. And as I got at the bottom, as we study this book, is God visible, or do things just happen? I'm going to put, or do you believe in circumstances, but took too much room, or do things just happen? So, because God isn't mentioned. Mm-hmm. And I'd like for us, as we go along through this, to really identify God moments. Okay? All right. So, some background. The Persian world at this time, and we're talking around 500 BC, the story here actually starts 483 BC and counts down. And we'll kind of, once we get into the actual chapter here, we'll start breaking that apart a little more. But first off, this is some of what we need to know. What was going on at this time, at the time of King Ahasuerus and Esther and Mordecai and all of those? Well, first off, the temple had been rebuilt. Okay? And actually, if the first 4 or 5 chapters of Ezra deal quite a bit about that, about Zerubbabel coming back and King Cyrus sending the temple vessels and stuff back with him. So when he rebuilt the temple, they had all of the things to work with. He restored that type of thing. So the temple is rebuilt, and an important part here is the opposition to building the temple. You read Ezra, and you read Nehemiah about all of the, in Nehemiah's time they're putting the walls up, and they were working with their sword. They couldn't he told them not to lay their weapons down. You work with your spear in your hand or your sword, you stay ready to repel at any time, because they were attacked at one point. So opposition. Then we move to the at this point the temple had been rebuilt about 30 years. And if you're reading in Ezra, this event right here, the event of Esther, happened between Ezra chapter 6 and Ezra chapter 7. It's right in between the end of the chapter and the start of the next one. And so 40 years later, after this time, Nehemiah went back to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Now Ezra came, the priest, he was sent back. He came from Susa, the capital, the winter capital. Nehemiah, when he went back, he came from the Persian capital, Susa also. In fact, most of the Jews that went back in the different restoration times came out of this particular area. Jews from other areas tended not to go back as much. They were settled in India or wherever. Okay. Any questions at this point? Okay. Now, the culture, it's a Persian world. And I'll show you a map of this Persian Empire here in a little bit. But the way the Persian government was set up, it had uniform laws throughout the whole empire. It didn't matter if you were India or Egypt or southern Greece or whatever, the laws were the same for everybody, every place. Very unusual, but it's even, all the way across the board. And also, the postal system was quite effective and reached throughout the kingdom. They send something out, and if you've read Esther, they send messengers on horseback. They had a regular postal system, and it reminded me of the Pony Express. When we lived back in the Midwest, I could mail a letter there in southern Iowa to, say, San Francisco. The Pony Express was faster. It cut about a day and a half to 2 days off the mail delivery. And I was thinking of that when I was reading about their mail system. Okay. So it's very, very effective. Now, another thing that we're probably familiar with that we need to keep in mind is the Persian law, and this came down actually, we're talking the Persian world. The Persians took over from the Babylonians, who took over from the Assyrians. Syrians are who took the northern kingdom, Israel, into captivity. Babylon took over from the Assyrians and had their capital at Babylon. And then the Persians took over, and they're the ones running the world at this point. So, but it started back with the Babylonians. The Persian law specified that an edict or law of the king was irrevocable. Once pronounced, it existed without end. It never went away. That was their law. And you recall from Daniel, when the king, Babylonian king at that time, the guys that didn't like Daniel's enemies, talked the king into making this deal that nobody could bow or pray, except to the king. And of course, Daniel was doing his normal thing, praying toward Jerusalem, and that's what got him thrown in the lion's den, right?
Mm-hmm.
The king didn't want that, but he couldn't do anything about it. Once he spoke it, let me take that back. It was once it was published. I mean, he could speak a lot of stuff, but once it was published, it was done.
Written in stone.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, imperishable stone.
Yeah.
Right, right. And you'll see that come up later on. Well, actually, I'm going to just mention it now. I don't think we actually get into that, but if you're reading Ezra, you'll find that the other provinces around Judah, they didn't want this. They didn't want Judah. They didn't want the temple. They didn't want Jerusalem. They didn't want any of that mess. So they got the king Cyrus involved, and Darius, and he is the one that worked with Zerubbabel and I can't pronounce the guy's name, but anyway, sent them back with and he had the letter. He published this, that the treasury was open to them. All of the taxes on the other side of the river were available. Anything they needed to build the temple was theirs. So later on, after things settled down and they had a lot of opposition, and then when they started work again on the temple, they wrote back to the king at that point, who was Cyrus, and he said, well, what's really going on? And they got some answer from the Jews there, and they said, well, we had permission from King Darius. So they went looking, and they found a copy of the scroll that Darius had published. And so Cyrus had he had no choice.
Mm-hmm.
He may have been wholeheartedly for it, but he had no choice, because this has no end. So he told them, you guys, hey, if you're not helping them, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And went on from there. So that's one of the things that law, being irrevocable, it really paid off for the Jews at Jerusalem. Because once Darius said it, as long as those kingdoms existed, it had to happen. Now you notice I've got there on the page, of particular interest is a moral standard of Persian. I thought this was really, really interesting. Persians considered lies, untruths, as a grave sin and criminal. To lie was the greatest disgrace. And when we get involved with Haman, take a look at what's going on. Now, it's not in the book, but this is how the Persian, again, this is part of that bigger picture. When Ahasuerus learns that he was misled, okay, right here, it's a grave sin and criminal. This guy, he made number one liked him. So, that was just, he'd been better off if he'd been a pedophile or something, as far as they were concerned. This is big news. So that's just something we want to keep in mind. Again, part of that big picture as we look through this. Okay, and the characters. Something that came out, you'll notice, got the names there. These are the main characters. Not a single one of those names is not Persian. I thought that was interesting, because you get to reading about Haman being against all the Jews. He didn't know Mordecai was a Jew. I always thought Mordecai was a Jewish name, but it's not. And so nobody knew what nationality of other people were by their names. So at this point, we're talking about this is happening about 100 years after the exile into Babylon. And if you recall back, the book of Daniel, the Jews that went into exile were born, the Jews of this time, 500 BC, they were born either into the Babylonian or Persian Empire, descendants of the exiles. You remember that exiles were given Babylonian names when they arrived at Babylon. Daniel and the 3 Hebrew children. Everybody knows about Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Those are Babylonian names. That's not their Jewish names. So, they would name their kids, children, offspring and stuff in the same manner. So, again, the names of the Jews do not reflect their heritage. Neither is Haman an Amalekite name, but is considered to be a Persian name. So let's talk the characters here. King Ahasuerus. In some of your translations, they use Xerxes, X-E-R-X-E-S. That's a Greek word for interpretation, I guess you would say, King Ahasuerus. Remember, the book of Esther now was written in Hebrew. Excuse me. So, a little more realistic to keep King Ahasuerus. Now, he is the second king of Persia, whose father conquered Babylon, established the Persian kingdom. And Babylon was the kingdom which had conquered Judah, took them into exile. Covered that already. I thought it was interesting, Ahasuerus' title was King of Kings.
That's interesting.
That was his title, King of Kings. I just kind of struck a note with me on that.
Yeah.
He served as Pharaoh of Egypt, and he was king over 127 provinces. Now the provinces mostly had governors, but some of them would be like minor kings and stuff. And so, the Pharaoh was a king type position, if you will. So, yeah, his title was King of Kings. Then Mordecai, he's a Benjamite, from the tribe of Benjamin. Now he stayed in Persia after the exile started going back, like Zerubbabel and so forth. And his ancestry shows him as a descendant of King Saul. He can trace, his ancestry can be traced back to King Saul. Now he was a high official in the king's court. Because we see more than once in the book here that he had a seat in the city gate, and that's where the judges and different officials sat. People would come, and they would deal with issues that kind of, not just a judge, but they were officials there. They sit at the city gate. Okay. Now, just on a side note, as far as the authenticity, or was this a real event, there's a tablet, I showed you that once, saying that Ahasuerus was made king. There's a similar tablet from Babylon that refers to a ministry named Mardukah, who was at the court in Susa during the time of King Ahasuerus. And, Mordecai, very well could be this Mordecai, which gives, it's pretty minor, but it gives a little bit of credence to the fact this actually happened. And he was, in that tablet, it says that he was a minister or an official in the court. Not just he lived, he was in the court at that time. So Esther, she's a Jewish woman in Persia, and she was born as Hadassah, which means myrtle, but she identified as Esther. So possibly, like Esther being born as Hadassah, it could be that the Jews and maybe some other nationalities had their home names, their Jewish names, but in public, he's Mordecai, she's Esther, he's Haman, and so forth. Okay. And she was a first cousin of Mordecai. She was raised by him after her parents died, and Esther would be under Mordecai's authority as an unmarried young woman. She grew up in his house. He was still the father figure, and in the Jewish culture, that means she answers to him until she marries. Okay. And the word Esther, that's Persian for Venus, the morning star, which sheds its light after all the other stars have ceased to shine and while the sun still delays rising. So Esther is for Venus, the morning star. And then the bad guy, the picture, Haman. And let's stop for a second here. As we read through, and we're going to start reading here shortly, as we read through this, notice what things have so much detail. Some of these things have just a tremendous amount of detail. When they bring Haman in, when he comes into the picture in chapter 3, he's immediately identified as an Agag. Agag, I guess, I'll stick with that. I mean, that's the first thing they do. They identify him as an Agag. Okay, so he is a descendant of King Agag, who was the king of the Amalekites during the Exodus. When they come up out of Egypt, there was that nation that they asked if they could pass through, they would pay for water and stuff, and they said, no way, you come this way, we're going to fight you. It was the Amalekites. And Agag was the king during the Exodus. They were Israel's sworn enemy for generations, and when we get over into chapter 3 and 4, we'll go back into some of the things God said about the Amalekites.
Oh yeah.
The name Haman is thought to be from the Persian for illustrious or magnificent. So, well, actually, he was. I mean, if you're numbered, it's kind of like Joseph when he was number 2 to the Pharaoh. They said the only thing the Pharaoh knew about was what he had for dinner. Everything else was in Joseph. Well, that's pretty much where Haman was. Here, you go take care of things. I've got a party to go to. That type of thing. Okay. So, we're up to speed on the country and the people. So, Pastor, if you would, how about reading Esther chapter 1 verses 1 through 4 and we'll break that apart.
Now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all of the officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the province were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days.
Okay. And that, let's do a, Paul Harvey, and what's the rest of the story here? Okay, as we look through this, we're gonna look at the extent of the empire. We're gonna look at Susa. You notice I've got Sushan there? Some of your translations will have Sushan. Sushan is the Hebrew word for Susa. That's why it's in there. And then we drop one, well actually, when we look at Susa, we'll look at the a little bit of the Jewish history there, and we'll look at the ruins, which has proof of the accuracy or reality of the book. And then the banquet, the purpose. And we'll look at a map of the Persian Empire. We'll look at, it's a common action of a Persian king planning a war to do this feast thing, this banquet thing. It all had to do with planning a war. And then you notice, as you said, the province officials, military officers attended. Why would you have military officers there? But anyway, we'll get into that. So, these are the provinces of Persia. And because it's important, I don't know how, I couldn't do much more with that. I scanned through quite a few of these to get here. This is Persia, and this whole thing, I've got a colored one later, but it doesn't show what I want. So, this is India, over here. That's India. This is North Africa, Egypt, Libya. This is southern Greece, right through here. It gives you some idea of how big this is. Here's Arabia. Now, right there is the province of Yehud, Y-E-H-U-D. That's the Persian word for Judea. That is the province, and they call it actually Yehud Mena something or other, which is the other word meant province. So this is the province of Judah. And this is just a side deal, but when you're working with or looking at Nehemiah and Ezra and some of the others, when they were really trying to get back established in Jerusalem and the temple and stuff, you'll recall Sanballat. He was from, here's Yehud, there's Samaria, that's where he was governor. And right up here is Phoenicia. Here's Arabia. Remember there was not an emir, chieftain from Arabia was part of the group that sent the letter back over here to Susa complaining about the Jews. So they surrounded Yehud. They didn't want him there. So this is a province, and these, I didn't count them. I don't know if there's 127. Looks a little short to me, but there's a bunch of them. And you look at how big that is. At the time, that was the biggest nation, country there ever was. And even today, you look at how many countries come into that, modern countries. It's really kind of mind-boggling. Oh, a bit of trivia for you. All the way over part of India, up to southern Greece, northern Africa, and across. You notice it's got the whole Fertile Crescent in there. This is the Mediterranean Sea, Africa. This is the Arabian Peninsula. You've got Kuwait and Dubai, all those things over here. This took in, at the time, right around 50% of the world's population.
Wow.
50% of the world's population. And they kept it together for a while. That's pretty impressive right there.
Right.
Look at the languages and so forth. Excuse me. Okay. Well, there's about at least 25 different countries listed here. I won't go through them. You can get an idea of just how big that is. Now, I showed you where Persia was up there, and that's where the capital Susa was. Now, these events in the book of Esther happened at Susa. There were other palaces, other capitals. They went to Susa in the wintertime. That was the winter one because it was too hot, literally too hot to be there in the summertime. So I don't know what the people did that had to stay behind. I wrote at this, the Greek historian wrote about that time, and he said it would get over 130 degrees in the summertime, and he said there were, he said a reptile that started across the road in the heat of the day would die before it got across the road. You know, and again, he's a historian. He's not. He might have embellished a little here and there, but it's pretty well established what or accepted. Okay, this is a rendering of the city, or not city. No, excuse me. Rendering of Susa, the capital, or the palace, if you would. Most of your translations will probably say either fortress or citadel, as far as my verse 2 there, mine says, which was at the citadel in Susa, and I don't remember, Brady, did yours say fortress or citadel or verse 2?
Mine says Susa. Mine says citadel.
One says citadel.
Okay. It basically was a fort that had the palace inside of it. Now this is a rendering of it, and I looked through probably at least 8, 10, maybe more renderings of what Susa would have looked like, and several had it on the side of a hill. It looked like, you know, almost like they'd mined it or something. You've got gates and stuff, and everything else is in the hill. And I'll show you here in a minute why I didn't do anything with those. You can see it's raised up, and fortress walls there. It's a fortress with the city is outside the walls. So the city is separate. You can see in the background, once you get past the walls, there's houses and stuff out there. And you notice they're lower. Now this has been excavated a fair amount, this Susa. It was built on an artificially raised platform 50 feet high, and it covered from 250 to 300 acres. Now, a square mile is 640 acres, so if you take 300 acres, you're talking a mile long and a half mile wide or so. I mean, we're talking really, really big, and that's the fortress, that's not the city. It's a pretty good sized place. You got plenty of room or maybe not with all the people they have there. But anyway, so, and the complex had a residential palace, an audience hall, and look at the picture. I wondered if that audience hall wasn't that large one right there, with the, you know, a little taller than the others. It's got kind of openings around, and a monumental gate. And we don't see the gate in this picture, but and just trivia, I had to really back out of some of this. I get so caught up in it. The audience hall was enclosed by 20-foot thick walls of round earth.
20 feet thick?
20 feet.
Oh
So
my gosh.
that would be probably the width of this building here. you know, that wall all the way through to the other one. You know, you wouldn't talk about the walls having ears or anything, you know.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it would make a lot of difference, all of that earth as far as pool and stuff, you know, the heat, so. But yeah, 20 foot thick is what they found when they're excavating. Now, just, there's Jewish history here. One of Daniel's visions, Daniel chapter 8, was in Susa. Vision was of this place. And, you know, Nehemiah came to build the walls of Jerusalem, and he served as wine taster to the king here. And it was King Artaxerxes, the son of the one that we're talking about here. His son, Nehemiah, worked for it, I guess you'd say. Now, I went to that, talked about the hill and stuff. This right here is an aerial photograph of the ruins as they dug them
Oh,
out.
wow, looks almost like that old picture.
It does. And do you see a hill or anything in the middle of that doggone thing?
No.
That floored me. You know, I'm thinking, well, several of these got that hill, so that must be part of it. Then I saw this and I thought, well, we're going to toss those pictures.
Yeah.
It looks kind of hilly on that one side.
It
Or
does.
Off out of it,
It does.
yeah.
And this, you can see kind of the what's the word I want? Outline. And since it was raised, artificially raised, they built it up 50 feet, so it's over everything else. You would imagine it'd be fairly level on top until they build it up. And if you look at that, and you think about 250 to 300 acres, you know,
That was a lot of work.
well, and how big.
Oh, we could mow that, no problem.
I was trying to figure out how far, like say from here, from the church down to the flashing yellow light. Any idea how far that is? I don't either. I don't know if it's a mile or, do you know, Tom?
It's a mile from our house to the church.
From our house to the church. Okay, so from here, where we sit here, on down past the water department would be about a mile. And then if we went from here down to the freeway, which is probably what, half a mile? You know, you go down Henry and stuff.
Pretty big.
So it'd be about that big a section. Now obviously it's a little, you know, it's not a square or rectangle, but gives you some idea how big that is.
Huge.
Now,
But don't you think they made the walls thick like that and high like that to protect the king?
I don't know. I personally have a tendency to think it's more about the heat. That doesn't mean it is.
Well, that's true.
But I don't know if you're aware, but an adobe, like, you know, in Mexico and then the Southwest, they built a lot of adobe buildings. And by having dirt on dirt, the temperature was moderated. By that, it's kind of like the cool wicked up in the walls. I think you got to have at least 2 to 3 foot thick walls, and it tends to wick up. In other words, it doesn't, you know, 100 degrees outside, it's going to be, you know, 10, 15 degrees cooler inside. It's going to stay that way because of the cool wicking up. It very well could be that, you know, for protection, whatever. But anyway, quite a layout, and that, like I said, that is just the fortress with the palace in it. And the city itself was spread out. Okay. Now, I mentioned about the ruins. The archaeological digs confirm the accuracy of the description of the fortress in the book. Talks about she's in the entered court, waiting for the king to recognize her and stuff. I kind of wish I'd kept that. I ran across a guy, he was doing more recent digs on this, and he said, you come and you look at this, and it makes you want to go back and read the book of Esther again. He said, the layout here is just like it's in the book, which adds a lot of credibility to the story. You know, whoa, it is just like, it's not. One of the commentaries I looked at had some intelligent discussion for a little while and detail stuff. Then they said, yeah, it's really patterned after the story of Joseph. And I thought, okay, we'll toss this one. But there's, you know, honestly no historical evidence about Esther. There's that one vague deal that might be more to come. But the story line here, the description of the palace and so forth, is spot on. And that's from an archaeologist that was actually working there. I think he'd been there 20 years or something. So, anyway, I thought it was kind of neat. It was another proof that, hey, this really was like that. So, let's move to verses 3 and 4, the banquet. What was the purpose of this? You know, is he just a party animal or what? So, you look at this, and this is the Persian Empire, again, just a different drawing of it, if you would. And you can see over in the bottom left, that green there, Libya and Egypt, and you can see up in the upper corner, the far upper left, you can see Thrace and Macedonia, and you'll recall those from the book of Acts, when Paul was ministering up in that area. Now this is the Persian Empire at the time of Cyrus, and then it went on to Ahasuerus, the one king today, that we're dealing with. And what I want to draw your attention to was first down in the bottom left there, Egypt. You can see Sinai Desert, Egypt, that area. And then if you go up and look up in that upper left, I mentioned about Greece, Macedonia and Thrace. Macedonia and Thrace, that's as far as the empire got under Cyrus. Now, here's the background for that banquet. This is year 3 of, you recall there, took place in verse 3, in the 3rd year of his reign. Okay, so what's he been doing the first 3 years? The first 3 years, he was down in Egypt, consolidating the empire down there. They had some defeaters. And that's how he came away as Pharaoh of Egypt. That's one of his titles. Now, after he got through down there, or in that same time period, he had rebellions to put down. Remember all of those provinces? Well, each one had a governor or a minor king or whatever. And the people would rebel occasionally. Like right now today, Turkey doesn't want Finland and Sweden to come into NATO because they are providing some haven for the Kurds in the northeast part of Turkey. Turkey considers them, and they are, they're rebels. They want their own piece of Turkey where they live. You got the same thing here. You know, look how big that is. You know, from India over there in the far right. The people all over the place. He spent the first 3 years dealing with Egypt and putting down rebellions in the provinces. Okay. So, he's got things settled down. Now, his dad, Cyrus, left off up there at Greece, in that top left, you can see there's more to Greece, more, and that actually is the push into Europe. Greece would be the start of Europe. And so they got a foothold in that one part. So at this point, third year, he's got the rebellions down, he's got Egypt doing what it's supposed to. He's planning to invade Greece. He wants to pick up where Dad left off and get on in there and get a good, bigger foothold in Europe. So, and I can say that pretty positively, because between chapter 1 and chapter 2 is a 3-year gap. When we leave off the last verse of chapter 1 and start chapter 2 with verse 1, there's 3 years difference. And the historical record, Herodotus and the others, this is when Ahasuerus was over there at the end of the Black Sea and so forth, Aegean, invading Greece. So the idea that, for the banquet. Anyway, so a common action of a Persian king planning a war was to assemble the provincial governors and military officers. The assembly would be to plan the war and to assure support. Remember now, this first 3 years, he spent part of that putting down rebellions. Provinces, or maybe not a province itself, but the Jews. The Jews were really bad, especially under Rome. They were really bad about rebellion. In fact, they really slapped the Romans around pretty good a few times. But we got here, so he has to have all of these people behind him. You put all your forces into an invasion, you got things committed. That's not a good time for a king to have people rebelling, over there toward India or down in Egypt or whatever. Well, because he's already committed into a battlefront. So he's got to get them on his side.
When were the Romans considered Italians?
They weren't.
They never were? Because isn't Rome part of Italy?
It is, but Italy didn't exist until later.
So, the Romans, they were just considered Romans, but they were never considered part of Italy?
No, because they weren't.
Oh.
Italy was a part of Rome once, but that was a long time later. They didn't have Italy. I don't think they even had the term Italy until after the Roman Empire divided, Eastern and Western Roman Empire, and then it broke down even more. I think that's when you went into city-states. I think that's when Italy came into existence. Kind of like until this country was settled, when did people become Oregonians? Well, it wasn't until the country was settled in name. Otherwise, it was Russian fur trappers along here and stuff. Anywho, I'm sorry, did I answer that okay?
Yeah, I was just curious about that.
Sure. Okay, so we got the empire. We know that after this banquet, he's got his army mobilized and his ships. Now he has ships too. He has his ships up there and the army mobilized, everything into an invasion of Greece. So, at this point, 483 BC, I think I covered most of this, featured the rulers, the governors, military officers. Now, here's the other part. You notice when he gets into that 7-day part, notice how detailed they are about the furnishings and where they have that. There's a reason for that. Because the way that works, it provided Ahasuerus an opportunity to show his ability to finance a war and reward his supporters. You know, there's, really, you think about it, if I'm gonna go to support, you know, king wants to go to war, I've gotta provide so many soldiers and this and that. What's in it for us? You know, we're gonna send these guys off to get killed, probably. What are we gonna get out of this? I mean, that's kind of a common thing, you know, even back then. So, again, like I said, the detail on some of this stuff starts making sense if you look at where Ahasuerus was with things. So, this 6 months that was planning, he had to convince them and get them on his side and get them, you know, won over to support him in this. So, you notice there's only, through verse 4, was we've got 180 days, everything picked up. And then when we go to the 7-day banquet, we got verse 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Just for that 7-day banquet. Okay. Well, we're at time here. I want to show you a picture. The 7-day feast. We'll pick up next week with verse 5. That's, you know, again, the archives were flooded. We didn't save any pictures from the time, so this is just our rendering. So, anyway, that's what we think it looks like. Just in case you do some studying, research on this kind of thing, I picked this particular picture because they're reclining on couches. If you read that, it says the couches were made of silver and gold. Yeah. Well, but they put cushions and pillows on them to recline on. That's, you know, that was their custom. How did the Jews the traditional Jews, like the time of Christ, how did they celebrate Passover? Did they sit at the table? Anybody know? They reclined on couches just like this. Read about you know, the one about the one leaning back against Jesus. You know, hey, who is it? You know, is it me? Who are you talking about? When he's talking about someone's going to betray him. This is how they did. They reclined because they were free people now. When they were slaves, they served those that reclined at the meal. Now they were free, they reclined. That's the concept behind it. Yeah, it's again, you know, you read that about them celebrating the Passover, and talks about them reclining and then him, you know, handing, again, as part of the ceremony, but they reclined.
So they were kind of mocking them a little bit?
No.
I mean,
this be kind of like displaying the flag on the 4th of July. We're free. We're Americans. We're, you know, yay us. That kind of thing. They reclined because they were no longer slaves.
They were free.
but they were reclining because that's the same thing that their captors were doing when they would.
Yeah, they had to serve the cap. Yeah, just like
okay.
this.
Yeah.
Well, see, think about it. When they were in exile, I don't know about the Syrians, but the Babylonians and these people here, the Persians, this is how they ate. They, you know, at feasting, I don't know, you know, they might stand up for a quick breakfast or something, but basically
They were there 180 days.
What's that?
They were there 180 days.
Right.
A long time.
Yeah, they had to change the pillows out, they got them dirty from the food. But anyway,
I don't think it was the food that got them dirty. I think it was all the flatulence going on, you know.
I doubt it. I doubt it. Anyway, this is where we'll pick up. And what I was going to say, again, pictures, there's all kinds of pictures about the feast, and they're all sitting in chairs around a table. And it says right there in verse 5, where is it? It's in there someplace about the, where is it? About the silver and the gold. Yeah, couches, verse 6, couches of silver and gold. Anyway, I guess I just mentioned that. You do any research, you gotta watch, because there's a lot of artistic license out there. Like the hill, you saw the ruins, like that hill in the middle of the city, you know, or the fortress.
Somebody made that up.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay. That's where we'll pick up next time. Just do this real quick. I had a little trouble with this, I may have deleted most of those. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get on. That, just a second. I guess I did delete them. Okay, I got so disgusted. Alrighty, show's over. There we go. Alright. We'll pick up there and go into chapter 2 next time. And remember, as you start into chapter 2, how long is it between the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2?
3 years.
Huh?
3 years.
Right, right. So as you read, as you start into chapter 3, or 2, I mean, he says he starts thinking about Vasta and so forth. He just got whooped. He didn't make it into Greece. He got beat real bad.